Hello and and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, wherever you may be viewing this for virtual attendees. We are pleased that you're here to join us for the last session of JNUC this year. My name is Mark Buffington. I'm a consulting engineer at Jamf. Quick reminder, we've already done this a bunch of times, but any Q&A, this is an exciting topic here that y'all may have seen some things in the keynote that we'll be able to dive into a little bit more. But Q&A, put it in the app. We'll discuss that at the end. But it is my pleasure to welcome you to the session for Hypothesis, Generative AI at Jamf, and my colleagues, Matt Bennu and David Price-Compson. Welcome.
You going to click? So yes, welcome everyone. My name is David Price-Compson, and this is Matt. I'm part of the data science team, but also part of a wider team at Jamf who've been working on AI.
Yeah, so we are part of kind of an informal group at the moment called the Jamf Collaboratory, and we were brought together to kind of be a tiger team to start to flesh out what are some of the initial use cases that we wanted to tackle with generative AI. So we represent a couple of different countries, different areas of products, so some security stuff, some Jamf Pro stuff, data science, and so on. So we've been on this for, I don't know, we probably got started, would you say, in
March, I'd say?
Yeah, pretty early on.
Yeah.
Maybe a little later than that, but yeah.
So today we're going to try and go through not just some of the stuff that we've come together to work on, but to sort of set the scene around how we view AI, how we want to tackle it, not just for you guys as customers, but also for our internal teams, for Jamf itself, and also talk about what the future might hold for Jamf and for AI. And there will, of course, be Q&A. So like Mark mentioned, put it in the app. If you have any other questions, we'll also be hanging around at the end. So it's quite a big question to ask at the start, but we'll go for it. So what do we mean by artificial intelligence? Now, I'm not going to pull up papers and discuss the sort of the ethics of it all, but when we're talking about AI at Jamf, we're really talking about the collection of machine learning, statistical tools, models of various sizes that can be used to do all sorts of tasks. Predominantly, we're starting to focus on text-to-text, so you put in a query, back comes a really interesting natural language response. But of course, there are much wider applications that you have seen out there in the wide world. In the past, Jamf has already looked at various use cases in machine learning, in other enablement technologies where we can put in automation on data. But this is our first real foray into this much broader, much wider problem space that has blown out of the sort of hype cycle and news in the last sort of year and a half. And as I've sort of started to mention, thinking about where this all came from, it was really just a single paper around the idea of attention, where I think it was some people at Google, I want to say, or OpenAI, where they created this new form of model, which is a large language model where you can give it one, maybe even two or three records, and it's able to understand the context and the idea of what you're trying to do much quicker than it would in a traditional machine learning sense. You can see here on the right how it's kind of blown up as well. Since, I think the beginning of the timeline there is 2018, which is where people like myself were already thinking, there's some models out there that will do a really good job of understanding natural language. But since then, in the last 4 years, we've seen GPT-3, 4, we've seen Bard, Palm, Llama, all these new, interesting, but huge models with billions and billions of parameters that are able to do quite compelling things. The real trick is that it's not sentience, it's not Terminator, it's not going to be something that comes and gets you. It's really just mimicking human text, human speech, and other such things. So don't be too scared yet, but we'll get onto some of the cool stuff we've been doing as well. So now that you kind of understand, how we view artificial intelligence and some of the tools to hand, we've already started to think about the use cases that are relevant to both us as Jamf internally, but also to you guys. So you can see a few up on the board. The general theme is that it's mostly about saving time. It's mostly about supplementing the work that you do. So productivity, saving time, making it easier to search knowledge bases, making it easier to find information that is spread across various data sources. And that's really where we've started looking, and we'll show you some of that in a minute. But of course, there are many more interesting specific use cases that are built into products. So summarizing alerts, summarizing notifications, a better understanding of the fleets and instances that you have, as well as improving any of the workflows that you've already started to elucidate to us. So you've seen this in the keynote. This is Ask Jamf. This is our knowledge-based search chat interface. And you'll have seen it talked about, as I said, by Akesh in the keynote, where if you were to compare the questions asked here along the top to something in ChatGPT, you'd get quite a vanilla sort of response, very much a bunch of responses that, yeah, it might work, it might be right, but it wasn't specific enough to actually what's being asked. So the example in the keynote is the top right one, which was, the question it would ask is, how can I run a policy at a specific time of day, for example, 9:45. So in ChatGPT, you would get like as I say, like a set of bullet points that would give you a really high-level understanding of what policy is, and maybe something around the configuration profile. But actually, when we'd run it here, where we've used Jamf Nation posts, we've used Jamf Pro data and documentation, it really understands how you should set that up, the actual attributes you would use, the actual policy that you would actually set, and then it's much more useful and beneficial.
Well, the other thing we found is like when and we mentioned this in the keynote, we tried that same question in ChatGPT, and it started giving a pretty good answer, but it hallucinated this idea of a schedule tab. Yeah, just click on the schedule tab, set it for 9:45, and you're all good. And this was kind of a window into where these things become troublesome, where it's like as soon as you ask a question that's not clearly spelled out in a data set somewhere, it has to go off script, and it doesn't for some reason know that it's going off script, and so it just starts spitting this out. So really, the basic idea of something like this, and this is very early stages. I was telling him beforehand, like it's not even necessarily a MVP, a minimum viable product. It's like a minimum demoable product that we wanted to bring here to just gather information to inform where we want to take this. But by adding more data sources, so for example, our documentation, and there's probably some of that documentation in the foundational model that GPT-4 it was trained on, but things like Jamf Nation posts, surely someone has asked that question of how to run a policy at a specific time. So by being able to give it more information in the moment, take the question, look against the data sources that are there, return chunks of relevant data, you lessen the scenario where it does end up off script. And that's how you end up with something that is much more focused on a specific domain than just a general use case chatbot like ChatGPT.
Right. And actually, in our next set of slides, as Matt mentioned, we brought it here with us, and some of you tried it out at our booth. And so we thought we'd show you some of the fun examples that you guys actually started to ask it and started to try and find those holes. So I think the first example is kind of a bit of a funny one. It was someone asked, what is the origin of the Jamf name? And actually, we get this question quite a lot. I won't go through the true answer maybe, but this is the answer that the LLM gave. It said something around that it's an acronym for Just Apple Matters Fool. And then goes on to tell you about the actual company and maybe a bit of a cross-sell about the products that we have now. Obviously, if you did know, that's not the right answer. But what's also interesting is that answer's not on the internet anywhere.
Yeah, we looked. We were like, where did it get this? So like, we went looking and found no evidence of this phrase ever existing. So it just interpolated its own backronym.
Yeah, it worked out the acronym and filled in some names, which is quite a good one, really. Just Apple Matters Fool. So,
I mean,
so there we go.
The fool part is questionable.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm glad it didn't do anything with the MF that it could have done.
Yeah.
Right. So then I think our next example, I believe, is a bad example where someone has tried to really push the LLM to somewhere that it doesn't necessarily know. So the question they've asked is, I want to prevent end users from removing some launch daemon created for Jamf Connect for their Mac. I won't read the whole answer, but we went through this morning and we were like, yeah, this isn't quite right. Some of the payloads aren't right. And I think towards the end, it then does do what we kind of want it to do, which is if you're not sure, go back to Jamf Nation or go to support, right? So it does in the end sort of give you something useful, but it's wrong. Like
it doesn't have the
help you.
self-skepticism to say like, is this thing that really exists? And we'll talk about how we plan to address some of these issues, but just wanted to show like it gives you a thing. It looks like you could do it. It's been a while since I personally used Jamf Pro, but I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not a real thing. So we went in and looked, and of course, yeah, you can't just say use Jamf Pro configuration policy to block entire directories. So interesting idea. Seems like it could be true, but it's not. So we did have wanted to share one where we did feel like it did a good job.
Yep.
Someone asked, just the question you can see is a very terse, it's like not even framed as a question, and it handles it pretty well. So force restart multiple iOS devices in Jamf Pro. So it gives a totally viable way to do this. It talks about how to do it. And that's not something that's necessarily, you could piece it together from the documentation, but it might take you a while to find exactly what you're looking for. You might not know that it's a management command if you're new to management. So you see it also even cites a specific Jamf Nation community post where it sourced that data. So that helps us know that it's going to be a little bit more of a grounded answer. So again, we have one that's kind of funny, but obviously went off script a little bit. We have one that it hallucinated some ideas still because we found a question that we hadn't accounted for yet. And then we have one where it's performing as we would hope and expect. So there are a lot of things for us to still work through. And really, aside from sharing our excitement in this technology with all of you, a main reason that we wanted to bring it here was to gather real-world questions. Because obviously, we can throw at softballs all day or just insanely hard, weird questions that would never be asked in the real world either. But we figured we would gather a good data set of questions from actual people who would potentially be using this in the future. And we've identified some challenges that we know we will have to overcome to get this to the point where it's ready for a more general release. And so let's just talk about a few of these. So the first one is just the notion of a right answer. So for example, a Jamf Nation post, you can ask a question in there, and you're going to get multiple answers. There's multiple ways to do things. Some of them are best practices. Some of them are maybe not best practices, but a lot of times it's like domain specific. Maybe some workflow that you're doing makes sense if you have 50 Macs, and another one, is more of an enterprise grade solution with thousands of devices and things like that. So it's tricky to find like how do you subjectively assess whether something is right. And really Jamf Nation as a data source is something that so far, so good. It feels pretty good, but obviously, short of us going in and grading each answer, like it's hard to know the things that we're feeding it, like what's the fidelity of that. And then also now that we're like openly saying that we're pulling in data from Jamf Nation, what's to stop someone from going in and putting in garbage responses to things that we're then sourcing? So we obviously then have to find some way to validate the data that's being fed in there. So that's something that we're really focused on. We have a few ideas on how to do this, and you'll start to kind of get the picture as you see some of our other ideas where we're headed with some of these things. Another big one that's kind of on the top of everyone's minds is just the notion of safety. And safety means a lot of things. So there's just the social aspects of having a large language model not say things that are dangerous or offensive or hurtful. But in the context of security and management, obviously we could cause safety issues just by giving bad advice, things that aren't safe that could be implemented in an environment. So how do we ensure that those outputs are not harmful? So far, so good. I don't think we've tried some weird strategies to get it to do things that would be scary or dangerous. And so far, so good. I should have saved some examples, but I was asking it things like, how do I use Jamf Pro to teach all of my coworkers a lesson about responsibility, or just these, kind of scenarios where you're pushing it to think in ways that are a little bit darker, and immediately, just for free, without us doing a ton of engineering, naturally pushes back on a lot of that and saying maybe it told me the best way to do revenge is by being really good at your job and doing things that are right, and you shouldn't be using, so it does really good with that.
And just to add to that, we've also been thinking about how people would interact with these things, right? So putting in a bunch of guardrails like visually for now in this UI, but in any UI that we would generate, like warnings over the data that goes in, be careful, but also the data that comes out, be very careful. So we've already, I mean, just today I was talking to a customer about this, and they were like, could you make it so that it would run a script straight into my environment? I was like, well, we wouldn't do that anyway, because that's quite dangerous, and we don't know what this is outputting necessarily actually works in your environment. But we would always put little warnings or little hints to be like, okay, use this, but at your own, at your own expense, essentially.
Yeah.
But that safety we can still build into the function itself.
And that safety is informing a lot of our design thinking. If you may notice, and you'll probably see this for the foreseeable near future anyway, it's just the notion of these tools being put in an advisory role. So we're not necessarily putting the controls in the hands of the AI to make a decision. So even in a support bot, it's giving advice. Obviously, the human has to decide whether or not to implement that. But it'll probably be some time until we have the self-driving car of MDM, because we have to develop our relationship with these tools. How reliable are they? How much can they be trusted to do such a thing? So for the time being, we really see these as things that can accelerate the work that people are doing, as opposed to being some type of competition for an actual human. Anything else you wanted to add to that?
No.
So the big one that comes up a lot is this idea of hallucination. We already kind of touched on it. So it's as soon as we get outside the scope of the training data and the data that's being fed in contextually, that's the recipe for hallucination. Presumably, we get promises from OpenAI and the people developing models that, it will be harder and harder, and it will start to recognize when it's hallucinating. But I think it's really the solutions I imagine they're really working on are just larger data sets and stronger reasoning skills. And those things will be minimized over time, but really it's going to come down to us having stronger data sources. So that's something we're looking at. We have a list of things that we want to add. So far, like what you've seen this week was very light, and we were very open about this at the booth. So it's a lot of the kind of vanilla documentation of our core products. It was the last 3 years of Jamf Nation posts, and some of our training materials, I believe, as well.
That's right.
So not a ton. So some people were asking questions about the Jamf Pro API. We haven't even fed any of that data in, and it will be exciting to see the types of things it'll be capable of when we start to feed it some of those richer, more technical data sources. And a lot of it just comes down to there are other ways. We've looked into doing this. Like you can actually have a secondary agent that's interrogating the output of the first. So you can say, this GPT or this language model produced this response to this question. Could you please fact check this? And it actually has a weirdly high success rate of fact checking. But as soon as you do that, suddenly you're doubling the cost of what it takes to run one of these things. So we're looking for other solutions as well, but even having it cite its sources, so when it's posting those Jamf Nation links, obviously that's convenient, but we also found that actually grounds it in reality. It lowers the odds that it's going to hallucinate, and that was something that we noticed right away once we started designing it that way. Another question is just the entire concept of a chat user experience. This has been like an internal debate on our team of just like the phrase chatbot. I think like there's just something about it that like is just almost already derogatory. And maybe it's just because we've had such poor kind of support bots over time. But some people, how many people in here use ChatGPT like on a regular basis? Yeah, like not a ton, a lot, but like definitely not, I wouldn't say the majority of people just raise their hands right now. And I think that's fair, and I think it's just because it's just not a way that a lot of people think or how they would want to interact with something like that. It can be a little bit tedious, and to get good outputs, you have to write these really long paragraphs and things like that. And so there are other interfaces, and let me just skip ahead a little bit. There's a quote. So this guy, Harrison Chase, he is the person who developed a framework called LangChain, and that's one of the frameworks that's being used to build a lot of these apps. It's kind of really cutting edge right now. But he said long term, there's probably better UXs than user experiences than chat, but I think at the moment that's the immediate thing that you can stand up easily without a lot of extra work. And in 6 months, do I expect that to be the best user experience? Probably not. So this is kind of where we're at too. Like we think like, okay, yes, let's provide a chat interface, but like what are the things other than a chat interface that this technology can be applied to that would really be a game changer and make our products more enjoyable and impactful and useful to use? So again, similar with this, like we don't have control over user prompts, so we don't know what you're going to ask or how good the question's going to be, so we have to account for the fact that you might not be providing enough context. So that's another thing we've explored. You didn't see it in the demo here this week, but the idea of like encouraging the chatbot to ask follow-up questions. So if it asks a question about how do I lock an iPad, it probably needs to know if you're using Jamf School or Jamf Pro or Jamf Now. So doing that helps kind of tamp down this issue of like not being able to control the user prompts. But there are other ways to address it. So we'll get into that a little bit here. So we knew we wanted to do a support interface right away. And so we just got started on that. And then there was essentially a hackathon that we had signed up for. And we had this other idea that was a little bit more off the beaten path that we wanted to take. And it was around the idea of taking raw data from security alerts, feeding it into a language model, and having it essentially assess, like do like a basic root cause analysis of like what happened in this alert, explain the reasoning of how it got there, and like what someone should do about it. So this was the idea that we took, and it was based around this idea. So I work in Jamf Protect, and Jamf Protect is really powerful. It has these different data sources, and they have some strengths and limitations. So we do a lot of static detection. So this is your basic idea of like antivirus. And the idea of static detection is that we can block stuff. But the idea is if we are able to block it, we probably already have an example of it. And that means that either it was probably adware, or it's from a campaign that already happened. And those components may or may not be reused again. We can block them. But the thing that is going to probably ruin an organization is something that hasn't happened yet. And so static detection is good for keeping up with what's happened so far, but it doesn't necessarily catch tomorrow's threats. And that's kind of the idea behind it. We also have this idea of raw telemetry. So raw telemetry, if you're not familiar, it's just kind of the idea of like capture everything that's happening. It's like a security camera that's always running. It sees everything. And it's really valuable to have all this data, but unless you know what you're looking for, it's just, in a way, it's kind of like data hoarding. It's good to go back if you need that information, but it's also not necessarily going to be the thing that's going to make the difference. In between, we have this idea of behavioral analytics. So if we take those things that were discovered like in static detection, existing malware or attacks that were done, those can be abstracted away into techniques or patterns of behavior that can be detected on. But again, it takes someone to understand when those things happen to be able to distinguish, because it's not the same level of reliability as like a static detection. My analogy for this is like, if you're a police officer and you see someone climbing through an open window at night, you don't know what's happening. That could be someone that's locked out. It could be someone breaking into a house. And you need to do some level of investigation. You can't just act on that. You have to investigate to go further. And so it's similar with behavioral analytics. And a lot of organizations just don't have the bandwidth or expertise to be able to sort through those sort of things. So this is where we felt that generative AI could make a difference. The scenarios that we looked at were you have someone who clicks on an applet that's essentially a fake version of Google Chrome, and it gives the user an AppleScript password prompt. They put their password in, it gets sent away to a remote server. That organization is now compromised, essentially. Alternatively, you have someone, they get a message from their coworker. They're trying to work through something, and the coworker says, yeah, just run this terminal command. And it's a curl to a script, and then that runs straight to an interpreter. They run the command, and it takes them to a Rickroll. Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. So you've all been spared from being Rickrolled, so at least there's that good news. But the problem with that is that these produce two identical alerts. seemingly identical, and it takes work to get to the bottom of which one is a prank and which one is your company just got compromised. And organizations often just, like 9 times out of 10, it probably is going to be a prank, and so you get that alert and you stop paying attention, and then the time that it does matter, it's too late. So using this technology, we, yep,
Cool.
that's supposed to be there. We are able to, and we have this at least, so this will help illustrate. So the idea is we can take the original alert data that happened, and we can actually pair that with the telemetry. So for example, in that case that a script is run, we have that alert. That's what triggers the alert. But we can also ask the question, okay, take that process. What other processes were spawned from that process? That tells us what that script meant to do. And we can pair that with the original alert data. Then we can bring in like the threat research from the threat labs team around like, why is this something that we even care about? Why is this a detection that is relevant, and what would one look for to determine if this is something that's benign or if this is something that's malicious? And then just even things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's a similar idea, but just what are other techniques, ways that this can be used, and then that information is brought in together as well. And dynamically, you get this alert, you push the button, all of this data is brought together to construct like a perfect prompt and put all together. This is what we've done so far and already had amazing results, but there's other ways that we can take this. We could start to bring in, and this is theoretical, we could start to bring in information about like who is the user, are they a developer, are they someone that's working in sales, are they on the home network, or are they working from the office? And we can feed that into the prompt as context as well. Is this a school? Is it a bank? Those are all things that are going to inform how to interpret an alert like this, and then even catering the response to the experience level of the analyst. Is this just someone who is a Mac admin that is suddenly responsible for doing Mac security and doesn't have a strong background in it, or is this someone that has been doing security for many years, and tailor the output to that specific use case? They click the button, and what's provided is a hypothesis. So essentially, a hypothetical root cause analysis of, based on what I see, this looks like a prank. The user clicked a button, and it's able to connect the dots across events. They entered this command in their terminal. Safari opened. It led them to this website. Being GPT-4, I actually recognize this URL. This is Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. And actually, that's a prank. That's a well-known prank. And so it's like having a security tool that's that context aware, that it understands the big picture. It's like having another person on your team. And even if its hypothesis is wrong, it's giving you the evidence and reasoning of how it came to that conclusion, giving you tips on what to check to validate it. And then off to the side, you have the processes, the binaries, like all that information that you could help use to validate the information that came there. And even a wrong hypothesis is a starting point, as opposed to just staring at a wall of data and not knowing what to do. So this is something that we think is really valuable. There's a ton of work that we need to do to like really make it a reality, but we've tested it in these limited scenarios, and it has been very effective. Anything you want to add to what we've done on that so far?
No, I would add that as sort of Matt suggests, we've only really, tested it on a limited set of alerts, right? And the main problem I think that we'll face here is that the various attack vectors and threats that we'll see will change, right? And so we'll then have to rethink the prompt or rethink the data that's going in to just ensure that those hypotheses that come out actually make sense to the relevant threat that we see. So.
Yeah, and that's part of the design of it. I mean, that's part of what makes it daunting to develop this, but literally every detection that we're doing will require a customized prompt that has all of this data. But again, this is an example where it's not a chat interface. We're not just saying, like, ask it a question. We're doing all that on your behalf. And we believe that this is an idea that can apply to many different things. Talk about, describing a specific policy that you want to see. And again, we talked about self-driving cars are a little bit far away, but this idea that we can bring in additional context. We can know that you're a school versus, you're this other thing. But there's also privacy questions that come with that too. So it's finding that right balance. This is why we talk about the idea of a collaboratory, where we're not just making decisions locked in a room, that we have input and understand, what the people that use our products think about this and like what they're willing to bring to the table in terms of data and information to make this all work smoothly. So lastly, let's just talk about kind of plotting the future. Where do we go from here? Obviously, I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions about this that we'll be getting to shortly, but do you want to talk about kind of our next phases?
Sure. So we actually don't want to just rush it out and put it into your hand straight away, sorry. And we're not going to promise any dates or anything like that, but we definitely want to make sure that we dog food this internally, first out the bat. And actually, what Matt was suggesting earlier around getting it to support would be one of our first sort of target groups to really give them this tool and this power to answer questions much more readily than having to search the documentation themselves. Once we've got a lot of that feedback back from them and the rest of Jamf, we would then look at rolling it out as sort of betas for you guys. So then again, we would spend that time gathering that feedback, giving it the right data, rebuilding anything we need to build there. And of course, in the interim of all this, like workshopping new features, new elements to the agents or to the knowledge bases that we would need.
Okay, that's our prepared content. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a number of questions come in. You've also answered some of them. Some of the biggest ones answered here right at the end of when can I try it? When can I get my hands on it? That's kind of the bigger theme here. There's another question that I'll just lead with. Since there have been some issues with like the video demos that were made, will they be posted elsewhere for review later?
Ooh, that's a good question.
We didn't put them as handouts, right? So they're not in the...
Yeah, I am not in a position from this stage to make any commitments, but that's something that we'll work on to make something like that available if possible.
Seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Some things here, just kind of some ideas, maybe what your thoughts might be on them, but outside of just generative AI, do you expect to bring machine learning AI into things like Jamf Pro itself to proactively identify issues across the fleet? And then a similar one, even could it provide a bespoke answer or questions around configurations unique to you in, say, a Jamf Pro instance?
I'll try and answer that one, I guess. Yeah, we would love to do much more in the wider product space, and we're already talking about creating a better intake of ideas that would cover the full product suite. So yeah, these are awesome ideas that I think
we definitely have discussed the idea of context-aware help, where it knows what policies you have instituted and those sort of things. But we've also had people come and beg us not to do stuff like that. So I think it's becoming clear that anything we do in that direction will have to be opt-in, opt-out based. Like it will have to we'll have to provide many controls over how you're able to interact with these things.
Sure, and some of these questions are also kind of like, since we're in the early stages here. I might even jump ahead on the question and say, like, there's some cool ideas here, such as generative AI for self-service that's user-facing. So if a user asks for a specific type of app, they get the apps in the catalog that apply to them. Pretty cool idea.
Yeah.
But ideas like that, would you suggest Jamf Nation ideas as a community-based discussion for cool ideas?
I'm talking to some of the admins about how we can get a nice category in there or a nice labeling so that we can get it straight to us more directly. So
awesome.
Yeah, put it into Jamf Nation.
I think that's kind of the broader spectrum of the questions. Really cool stuff that you all are working on. Beyond giving feedback to Jamf in general, for the two of you, how can our audience reach out when they have future questions and such with the two of you?
I think the best way for me is probably LinkedIn, but we are also going to hang around here. So if you had any immediate questions you didn't want to ask live, like you can come and talk to us here.
My handle is Benyo on Mac Admin Slack. If anyone has to have a conversation,
or in Slack, that's a good point. I'm in Mac Admin Slack as well.
Awesome. Round of applause for these gentlemen here. And thank you. Hope you've had a great JNUC.